Now we'll have the honor of listening to Professor Dr. Carlos Monteiro on the reason for the recommendations of a healthy food nutrition should take into consideration the purpose of the processing of these foods. Carlos Monteiro is a tenured professor of the Department of Nutrition of the Public Health School of the University of São Paulo, scientific coordinator of the Epidemiological Research Group in Nutrition and Health of the University of São Paulo. With the floor, Dr. Carlos. Thank you very much. I'd like to start by thanking all our listeners and thanking you for being here with you. I'd like to greet my colleagues Gisele and our colleagues from the Ministry of Health and our colleague from PAHO, WHO, FAO, representatives of the different countries that we have in this meeting. I will start by sharing my screen. Very well. Well, the theme of today's presentation is, well, a question. Why food guides should take into consideration the processing of the foods? Well, my slides are in English, but I'll be speaking in Portuguese for today. Well, I'll start attempting to answer why today we can't ignore this processing of food when we make recommendations on healthy foods or healthy feeding. And we'll see a classification of foods that take into consideration the processing of food, and then we'll see epidemiological evidences that shows that some of these groups, the classifications of foods or the ultra-processed foods, how they relate with the quality of the diet and the health of the population. And we will see some food guides that are based on their classification. The first question is, why in the last century the food processing issue was less important, but it has become so much more important currently, and due to a series of reasons. And the most obvious one,
nutrientes críticos nos alimentos é hoje pesadamente determinado pelo processamento de alimentos. E como nutrientes críticos, eu quero me referir aqui ao sódio, a gorduras saturadas, a gorduras trans, e também aos nutrientes protetores, proteínas, fibras, micronutrientes. Mas, igualmente importante é o fato de que, nos alimentos, claro que os nutrientes são muito importantes, né, que vão definir o perfil nutricional da dieta, mas os alimentos, eles têm outras características que também influenciam as condições de saúde, a começar pela matriz alimentar, ou seja, as interações físicas e químicas que existem entre os compostos químicos que a gente encontra nos alimentos. Essa matriz alimentar, ela pode ser alterada, ela pode ser destruída pelo processamento de alimentos, dependendo do tipo de processamento. Um segundo aspecto importante é que os alimentos, eles não só contêm nutrientes, mas eles contêm outros compostos químicos que não são formalmente reconhecidos.
Other components that are recognized, but they are very important for the protection of health. For example, the antioxidants. Another important aspect is the food. Due to their processing, they may become vehicles of chemical substances that are strange to the food, that are foreign to our metabolism, that we call xenobiotics. We see the additives present in a large number in the foods, but also substances that are released by the packaging of some foods that are the endocrine disruptors that are important, and even the substances that are generated by the very processing, especially in this by this aggressive processing, like high temperature and high pressure. There are different characteristics of food, such as texture, the palatability, the accessibility. There are characteristics, and they're influenced by the processing of foods that also influence or health condition, specifically, or capacity of regulate the energy balance to try and prevent obesity. And finally, the ways of eating, or how we eat, how much, where, with whom, all of that influence the health conditions, especially the energy balance
O fato de que o processamento de alimentos é
and the
importante
food processing. The fact it is has become important on a, well, has been consensually aware. This publication in 2019 of WHO and FAO that establishes the principles for healthy food, for healthy diets. It says in the second principle that healthy food is based on the variety of unprocessed foods that are minimally processed foods and without the presence of highly processed foods. What is not a consensus yet is what are minimally processed foods and what are ultra or highly processed foods. For that, we need a classification of foods according to their processing. And this is the new classification that I will bring you now. The new classification has been presented in 2019, was refined, and it's present in these articles that I've been showing, that I'm showing you. And for you to understand a bit this new classification, it's important for you to understand how the processing of foods is within the food systems. The industry that processes the food, they are between agriculture, which is the true place where the food are in. The industry only transforms it. And so the industry is between agriculture and the kitchen, where the food is prepared, or directly between the agriculture and consumer. In case of the foods ready to eat, but the foods, they very few foods don't go through processing, but the largest majority of these foods, they go through processing. But to divide them in process and unprocessed doesn't make any sense, because most of them is processed ultimately. What the new classification does is it groups foods according to the processing, taking into consideration what was the purpose of the processing used in the production of that food product. So we have three purposes. Well, it is a human activity, is 1,000-year-old, but the human society, why do they process foods? Basically, to improve their duration, to make their preparation easier, and sometimes to enhance the sensory properties. One example is the pasta, olive oil, and cheese. Those three cases, we gave these three purposes quite clearly presented. And in reality, the traditional standards of feeding, they're very well composed by unprocessed foods, fruits and vegetables, and the three groups of foods that I've mentioned. There are the three main products of the new classification. Group one is minimally processed or in natura. The second is processed culinary ingredients, and the other one, processed foods, which are the joining of the first and second groups. And what processes do I use to reach group one, two, and three? Well, physical process mostly, removal of the unedible parts, drying, freezing, fermentation, pasteurization, grinding, the, the use of salt and sugar is common for the processed foods, but there is a fourth group in the new classification where the purpose of the processing is not anymore to improve the duration of the food, nor to make the preparation easier, nor to provide this food or to improve the sensorial characteristics of this product. Or the purpose of the fourth group, the ultra processed foods in this case, is to create products that are extremely convenient, ready to eat. They have a long duration, they are palatable, and hyper palatable rather, and have a low cost, so they're highly profitable to the industry, and the most important, they have the capacity of substituting all other foods. So today in the market, we find ultra processed alternatives to each and every food of group one and each culinary preparation based on group one. And what processes are used to produce the ultra processed foods? A sequence of processes. That's why ultra processed. So everything starts, in fact, with the breaking of the whole foods and the breaking it into food substances, oil, fats, starches, protein, all of those substances extracted from the foods, they are modified chemically for hydrogenation, for example. And a third step is the assembly of this new product. So the joining of the protein with the starch and fat in this assembly, this combination of macronutrients is normally not palatable. So an important step in the creation of the ultra processed food is the use of cosmetic additives. They're there to provide color, texture, flavor to these products. And then we have the packaging, frequently using synthetic material, and this is very important for the health. Well, here a more definition of ultra processed foods, which are the industrial formulations of several ingredients that include the original chemically or chemically modified food substances that result in the fractioning of whole foods that contain additives that are used to make the product more palatable or hyper palatable. But the most important thing is the aim, the purpose is to create products that are convenient, hyper palatable, low costs, that have the potential of substituting all other foods. Although the definition is not simple of ultra processed foods, there are markers of ultra processed foods that help us identifying when we are looking at an ultra processed foods. Those markers are two types. Well, either they are substances that are not used in kitchens, for such as protein isolates, gluten, casein, whey protein, or cosmetic additives, flavor enhancers, emulsifiers, so on and so forth. Another characteristics is they are produced by large corporations and they have a great capacity to create demand for the products. Those 10 companies, they sell daily 1.1 billion US dollars in the world. And that you see the ultra processed sales in 80 countries in the world. So you can see their consumption can reach over 300 kilos per person a year in the United States, but it's low in poorer countries. But this situation tends to change because those 10 corporations are, or their targets is to reach these other countries, including several countries of Latin America, as we are, as the ones we are, in order for the consumption to increase, reaching the levels that we have in the United States. And data shows exactly that. We see the growth of the ultra processed food sales in 2019 Latin America. It goes from 26 to 36 kilos per person a year. And what we have as evidences that show that ultra processed foods influence in the quality of the diet and in health. This scientific production that studies these ultra processed food has been quite dynamic in the latest years. We have over 700 scientific articles that use this term ultra processed foods. And what does this scientific literature shows? Part of these results, they are summarized in this 2019 FAO publication that you can consult. Well, basically, what the studies show about the quality of diet is that the more ultra processed foods you insert in diet, the more is high energy density and more sugar and more unhealthy fats, less fiber and less protein. So this is the perfect recipe for the chronic disease, for the uncommunicable diseases. And those studies are taking place in over 15 countries. The ultra-processed foods, though, they do not affect only the food intake and quality of the diet. You see 7 mechanisms and effects of the ultra-processed foods in the quality of the diet that do not have to do with the change in the nutritional profile, low satiety, the microbiome, change in the reduced presence of bioactive component, and other mechanisms.
As regards the impact on health directly, in, we had various meta-analyses that evaluated these relationships. And the consumption of ultra-processed foods when and followed tens of thousands of people for many years, what do they show? That the people consume more ultra-processed food had greater risk of obesity, hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, metabolic diseases, depression, and mortality for all reasons. So this evidence nowadays is pretty robust. And some of these works that did the meta-analysis confirmed these for various diseases. And many of you probably read this famous article by the National Health Institute of the United States that demonstrated in a very elegant way and convincing way that ultra-processed diets, when you have a great quantity, increases the caloric ingestion in at least 500 kilocalories and increases the weight of those people. And based on that evidence, we have various dietary guidelines that are based on this. And following that, we had in terms of the guidelines from Uruguay, Paraguay, Ecuador. These are very similar to the Brazilian, and the most recent is the nutritional recommendations by Israel. Some's already using these guidelines. The Brazilian has the structure. I'm going to talk a little bit about the choice of food of the Brazilian dietary guidelines. There are some important aspects, and Mr. Jeffrey will comment with you. There are 4 recommendations. Is that first, that healthy food should be based on group 1, in natura, minimally processed foods, with some qualifications. There has to be great variety, mostly from vegetable sources, and best if it is produced in a sustainable manner, family agriculture. And the reason for these are many. The second recommendation is group 2. Because in other dietary guidelines, very frequently, we put these at the top of the pyramid to use them only once in a while. If you cook and it's part of this group, you need these. But the secret here is to use it in small quantities, because without it, you will not consume and of group 1 and in a healthy and agreeable way. And the recommendation is the same if you use in small quantities as part of your meals or complementing these. And finally, as regards ultra-processed food, the orientation is to avoid them. And the reasons are many. The nutritional profile of these foods that is totally inadequate, and another because they are produced to be consumed in excess, and because they don't give you a sensation of satisfaction, and they take away other foods from healthier groups, and the means of production, marketing, and consumption of these foods, they damage culture, social life, and the environment. The golden rule to seek minimally processed and foods that be prepared, meals that be prepared, and avoid ultra processed. Don't substitute water, milk, fruit for soft drinks, dairy drinks, or biscuits. He's pretty clear in that recommendation. And I just like to say that the Dietary Guidelines is a community process, involved dozens, hundreds of people all over Brazil, many Brazilian universities, and was done in partnership with the University of São Paulo and Parro. So it's a lot of people that are involved, and I always like to mention these people at the end of my presentations, and I'm open to any questions you might have. Thank you for the information, Dr. Carlos. Now to talk about processing of food, well-being.
Dr. Jeffrey, só pode ligar o microfone?
Could you turn on your microphone, please?
Excuse me. Okay.
Ok.
Thank you very much for everyone at PAHO OMESC who organized this seminar. It's great. For nearly 40 years, I have worked with and helped to devise international and national dietary guidelines. These are the basis for policies and actions designed to maintain and improve health. Once they worked well, almost all now are based on an obsolete paradigm. This presentation is in 5 parts. First, what paradigms are. Then, the origins of nutrition as a biochemical science. Then, dietary guidelines based on this concept. Then, the 2005 New Nutrition Science, the Nova Food Classification as from 2009, and the Brazilian Food Guide of 2014. Then, the new paradigm for nutrition science. No science is absolute. Sciences begin with ideas developed into general theories known as paradigms. These are tested by observations, experiments, and new discoveries and experience. Paradigms are never the truth. Nutrition science is dynamic. It needs to respond to circumstances. This remains true in this crisis of pandemic out-of-control obesity and its many related diseases and conditions. The German chemist Justus von Liebig developed nutrition into a hard science, following the discoveries that food can be reduced into measurable chemical constituents. He saw protein as the master nutrient because it promotes growth. He invented the first commercial artificial formula based on cow's milk. His importance to governments was that high-protein diets bred and sustained big, strong men fit to fight land wars. His work accelerated the industrial and agricultural revolutions, notably in Prussia, the UK, and then the USA. Now, 200 years later, his concept of nutrition as a biochemical or nutricentric science is still dominant. Dietary guidelines issued at the time of the 2 world wars were designed to encourage consumption of more food seen as healthy. They were effective. Guidelines rely on food tables. The chemical composition of foods, the first official UK food tables shown in the slide, stated knowledge of the chemical composition of foods is the first essential in dietary treatment of disease or in any quantitative study of human nutrition. Such food tables have been elaborated and enlarged ever since. They are Bibles for dietitians and nutritionists. Now, here are two of the US dietary guidelines now published every 5 years. Globally, with those used by UN agencies, they are the most influential in the world. These flipped the original purpose, being designed to discourage consumption of constituents of food seen as unhealthy. Their thinking was driven by the theories of the US physiologist Ansel Keys. The biochemical paradigm did not shift. Guides continue to divide foods into the chemical constituents thought to affect human disease and health. People were seen as individual consumers. Little attention was given to how foods are made. Relationships between humans and the living and natural worlds were ignored. Good health was mainly seen as absence of some physical disorders and diseases. These guides probably helped to reduce cardiovascular disease, but not obesity. Here is the current US guide, issued when obesity and diabetes are out of control epidemics in the US and worldwide pandemics. It has changed only incrementally from previous issues. It has more on meals and some on dietary patterns. There is still little on foods, how foods are made. Relationships between humans and the living and natural worlds are ruled out of scope. Now there is a crisis of confidence in these guidelines. The report advising this guide states, the typical American dietary pattern is not currently, nor has it ever been aligned with recommendations issued by the Dietary Guidelines for Americans since their inception in 1980. Scholars commonly point out failures of the guide or have a broader view. This list of some of the problems and failures of current food guides shows obvious limitations as set out here. Such guides are obsolete because foods, times, and needs have changed. Now, a global industrial food system is increasingly dominated by processed packaged products made by transnational corporations. The global pandemic of obesity is a great warning sign, but almost all current food guides continue to follow the biochemical paradigm. Paradigms, like maps, need to be redrawn when they fail to show the way. The evident failure of accepted paradigms is the first stage in shifting any paradigm, as is contrary evidence. Typically, crises are also needed, such as with food, the obesity pandemic, and climate disruption. New concepts leading to a new paradigm need to be stated and tested. Also needed is a critical mass of influential people, like yourselves, who accept the new paradigm or who have grown up with it. This takes time. In April 2005, a new concept for nutrition was devised by the New Nutrition Science Project. A total of 23 scholars and authors, including 3 successive presidents of the International Union of Nutritional Sciences, formed a panel for a 3-day workshop at the University of Gießen in Germany. In September 2005, the New Nutrition Science was launched in a plenary presentation at the International Conference on Nutrition in South Africa. In the next 2 years, it was discussed and endorsed at conferences held in Spain, Australia, China, Chile, Canada, Sweden, and Brazil. The Australian working group is shown above. The key product of the New Nutrition Science is the Gießen Declaration. The declaration states that nutrition is a social, economic, and environmental, as well as a biological and behavioral science. Political can be added. This new concept makes nutrition science altogether more relevant, important, positive, and exciting. This list shows the scope of the new nutrition science. It fosters the meaning of health as stated by the World Health Organization, which is complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Social, economic, political, and environmental dimensions are not add-on extras to be secluded as final chapters or appendices of reports. Food guides need to be prepared by people from a constellation of disciplines. Starts have been made by independent international groups. Here is the second and consequent theory, which Carlos has discussed. Once nutrition is seen as a whole, it becomes obviously irrational to equate food with its macro and micro constituents. There's much more to food than that. Since the 1970s, food systems and dietary patterns have become transformed, and rates of obesity have rapidly increased. The obvious reason is what is done to food before it is purchased and consumed, which is to say, food processing. The report advising the current US guidelines also states the food components to limit consumed in success come from sweetened beverages, desserts and sweet snacks, candy and sugars, breakfast cereals and bars, burgers and sandwiches, higher dietary fat, dairy products, food items that are predominantly fat, and mixed dishes such as pizza. Snacking is more prevalent, almost universal. Now, if you look at the slide above, you will see that a word is missing. The products listed above are almost all processed, or to be exact, ultra-processed. Here above is a list of the benefits of the NOVA food classification. It identifies healthy food patterns based on whole and minimally processed foods made into freshly prepared meals, together with processed culinary ingredients and some processed foods, as Carlos has discussed. Almost all food is processed in some way before it is consumed. Most individual processes are benign or neutral. Some are malign, such as the partial hydrogenation of oils that creates trans fatty acids. NOVA identifies unhealthy food patterns as largely or mainly made up from ultra-processed foods, using processed industrial ingredients, further processed together with ranges of additives with little or no whole food. Humans are not evolved or adapted to these artificial products. In 2014, Dietary Guidelines for the Brazilian population was published, a 3-year process supported by the Pan-American Health Organization. It is the first effectively to adopt the 2 new theories, which I've summarized above. It is based on explicit principles. Drafts were discussed and revised in meetings with public health professionals from all 24 Brazilian states. You saw some of them in the photograph that Carlos presented at the end of his presentation. Its recommendations are for freshly prepared dishes and meals as actually consumed by 1/5 of all Brazilians. Its analyses and recommendations take society, the economy, and the environment into account. Other governments have now incorporated NOVA in their new food guides, as Carlos mentioned. So here is the new paradigm and purpose for nutrition. It is universal, positive, fits the facts, and faces the future. After discussion and review, it should be declared and published in all contexts as the first principle of the theory and practice of nutrition science, including food guides. The biochemical paradigm is shifting, including within the United Nations. The text above is the introduction to the 2021 UN Food Systems Summit, just ended. which is splendid. That's exactly what's needed. Salutations to many colleagues. These include Klaus Leitzmann, Mark Valquist, Carlos Montero, the New Pens team, some of whom are shown above, and many hundreds of others in other countries. If anyone wants a copy of this paper, I prepared a full paper which is available fully referenced, and my email is above, jeffreycannon1@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jeffrey Cannon. Neste exato momento, nós iremos então abrir.
At this moment, we're going to open for this first debate of our seminar. We'd like to invite Dr. Gisele. But before passing the floor to Dr. Gisele, we kindly ask you, as everybody who wants to contribute, to post them on chat or click on the link or raise hand link that is under reactions below your screen. We will open the floor to 3 to 5 questions. Dr. Gisele? Hello, I'd like to thank you all for the great presentation explanations of Professor Carlos and Jeffrey and everybody who spoke today. We're going to open for questions. Should you have the interest of asking a question, you can raise your hand or post on the chat function. While people are writing, I will I'll myself ask questions to start the debate. For Lina from the Late Show, are you still with us, ma'am? Well, I believe it would be important if Lina could speak a bit, Ms. Mahi, to speak to us in the countries here on how the Healthy Diets Coalition will work that is being proposed in the scope of the summit. And for Israel, if he could speak a bit more on next steps, if there are any other regional FAO agenda for food and vegetables, for the food and vegetable year, and for Professor Carlos and Professor Jeffrey, considering the challenges established by the pandemic that most countries have been facing, such as the impact in food systems and malnutrition, what strategies do you see as important for the countries to adopt to strengthen their food guides? If you could speak a bit on that, it would be great. And we have the chat open for whoever would like to voice their questions to WHO, FAO, and the researchers. Thank you very much. Lina, Ms. Mahi, could you speak a little bit on the proposal of the Coalition of Healthy Diets? Thank you.
Thank you, Giselle, for asking that question. In fact, we do have a concept note of the Healthy Diet Coalition, and we want to co-create how the coalition will function with the partners that will support it. Especially, we would love some member states to lead the coalition together with us. We have had some expressions of interest, including from Denmark, Sweden, Ghana, Switzerland, and as I mentioned, some UN agencies as well. In fact, on Monday, we have a meeting with representatives from Chile that have also expressed interest in joining. So what the coalition really wants to do is support the countries in realizing and implementing their roadmap for food systems transformation. We cannot and we do not want to push for any specific model. This is for the countries to decide upon. And many of the countries, as I mentioned, have done food system summit dialogues and have determined specific roadmaps, what they want to focus on. So the issue is to have a function of peer-to-peer learning, like this group is doing, on specific topics. There could be subgroups in the Healthy Diet Coalition, maybe focusing on food supply, food environments, and valuing of food. And then support these countries with specific technical support, like the UN agencies are doing, and especially like share the experience. That's the whole purpose of this Healthy Diet Coalition, and provide the technical guidance that our UN agencies are producing on the topic. So that's overall, that's why it's important that we also have many member states joining, to avoid that there will be a too much influence of a certain vision. We want to have an open vision. We definitely also want, for example, African countries to join. We do have an interest of Ghana, but we don't want some of powerful member states to kind of over-influence. It has to be balanced so that countries can really go their own way in how they think they need to change their food system. And of course, as also Jeffrey Cannon has seen, paradigm shifts are needed, and it's political. It's linked to political views, so that therefore it's important that there is a variety of options for countries to see which way to go. And of course, we would love that countries choose for the most healthy, most sustainable, most fair way of food system transformation. But anyone who wants more information, I'll put my email in the chat. Please contact me if you want to engage and want to know more. Thank you.
Obrigada, Lina. Aqui no
Thank you, Dr. Mahi. Here we have received in the Ministry of Health the proposal of coalition, and we are it's under analysis. I believe the other countries may have received that, and it's under analysis. And I believe it is a great opportunity to strengthen even more this debate. Now I'd like to invite Israel to speak a bit about the International Year of Fruits and Vegetables, and how this agenda may boost the minimally processed foods. Thank you. Mr. Israel.
Israel.
Talvez ele tenha desconectado.
Ele não consegue. Bom, então assim.
Well, a debate that I'd like to hear a bit, but there is a question from Gabriela, from Professor Carlos, to Professor Carlos. I mean, should like to know what is the methodology, the most adequate methodology for the evaluation of the scientific evidence when we try to incorporate the processing of foods in the guides. And this is from Gabriela from Argentina. Professor Carlos, if you'd speak a bit of strategies that you believe the countries can use to strengthen these food guides. And this is an important point to be. Thank you for the space. Well, with regards to what the countries may do, first, the dissemination of the guides, the food guides is the first step, but it needs to reach people. Tomorrow we'll discuss this dissemination, which is indeed fundamental for it not to be a document on the shelf, and for it to go to the places, to the people that you need. But it's also very important for us to create environments in which the recommendations that we have on the guides are to be adopted, first and foremost. So those policies are fundamental. The food guide for the Brazilian population, the chapter of obstacles and policies necessary to go against these obstacles. Under these policies, it is fundamental for us to understand why the ultra-processed consumption is higher and higher around the world. What are the factors that lead people into abandoning the traditional foods, the traditional way to feed, and start looking into ultra-processed? One of them is marketing. In our countries, in Latin America, where the consumption of ultra-processed foods is still not like the United States or Canada or the UK, marketing is fundamental for these companies, because it is with the marketing that they're able to create the demands on their products and substitute the minimally processed foods. This marketing must be regulated just like we regulate tobacco, alcoholic beverages. There is no reason for the marketing of ultra-processed foods to be unregulated as it is in most countries. So to regulate marketing. And the other point is the access, the price. These foods, they're based on low-cost ingredients, just like cigarettes. They'll tend to cost much less than actual real foods. So you, just like tobacco, it is important for you to have taxes that make the cost of the consumption of such foods to be taken into consideration. Well, in many countries, these ultra-processed foods, they are subsidized. And there is also institutional food procurement. Brazil has a great experience with a school feeding program that tries to ban ultra-processed foods, and they're labeling, nutritional labeling is important in many countries in Latin America, such as, well, Chile has started, Mexico as well. Brazil has a great way to go, but it's important for people to be aware about the labeling. There are no other mechanisms to inform consumers other than warning labels. And it is important for us to advance on that. With regards to the evidences, just briefly, generally in the nutritional epidemiology, we must take into consideration the totality of the evidence. And what this evidence shows us from the national habits of consumption that I showed in the beginning, the studies of mechanisms and cohort studies, clinical assays, all of these pieces of information are important. Fortunately, we have, in many countries, we have all the evidences that, since they're necessary, for the food guides to be reviewed and be incorporated in this food processing. I think I have spoken too much, but thank you very much for the space. Thank you, Professor Carlos. Now I'd pass the floor to Professor Jeffrey, if he could speak a bit from the perspective of what challenges he sees the countries facing towards the implementation and adoption of the food processing levels in their guides, and the strategies that can be used to strengthen the guides in the countries. Mr. Jeffrey, could you turn your microphone on, please?
I'll just mention two things quickly, and these are both supportive of what Carlos has said. First of all, Lisa Mahi, you mentioned powerful actors that can play too great a part developing healthy diets globally and nationally. You didn't mention transnational corporations. How are you going to keep them at bay? The second thing I want to mention, which again is supportive of what Carlos is saying, and I think one of the points he made in his impressive presentation was the importance of processed culinary ingredients consumed in moderation. Now, what's almost entirely missing in dietary guidelines, with the very conspicuous exception of the Brazilian dietary guidelines, is meals. Dietary guidelines tend to talk about foods, and also there's a lot of stress on fruits and vegetables, which are, of course, usually eaten as snacks. It's crucial the dietary guidelines emphasize the importance of meals. That's all I want to say.
Legal, muito
you, sir.
obrigada. Para nós encerrarmos esse bloco,
And first, to close this block, I believe there are a couple of comments on chat. Mozambique has signaled that they do not have food guides, and they would like to count on the support of the people who are participating in this forum. And I'd like to say that the Ministry of Health, in the scope of the CPLP, has signed a recommendation for the ministries of CPLP, and this is an ongoing process with the support of the Brazilian Cooperation Agency, ABC, for Brazil to support these countries in elaboration of their food guides. Dr. Mahi requested the floor, and I'll pass the floor to her, but if anybody else would like to speak, we can have another round, and we go to the next session after that. Ms. Mahi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Gisele. I just want to respond to Jeffrey's question that was directed to me, that I didn't mention transnational corporations. I mean, I said powerful actors are there. They include definitely transnational corporations. So with regard to the Healthy Diet Coalitions, you have to know the whole onset and design of the Food System Summit was multi-stakeholder business. So from the beginning, all stakeholders were at the table, and this is very unusual and a trend. I'm not judging whether it's a good or a bad trend. I'll keep that my personal opinion, but that everything now is multi-stakeholder and everybody from the onset has to be at the table, even for policy making, which of course brings us in the issue of conflict of interest. So with regard to the Healthy Diet Coalition, for now we ask for member states and UN agencies to join while we design a sort of principles of engagement from non-state actors that shows that they will in a positive way contribute to the objectives of the Healthy Diet Coalition, which is to bring access to people of healthy and sustainable diets. So it's a definitely difficult and complex issue, and definitely transnational corporations have a lot of power. Over.
Obrigada, Lina.
Thank you, Ms. Mahi. And before passing, or Dr. Mahi, rather, we have a question on chat that at first was not approached by the panelists, but it is the concern of Miriam asking about, statistics. Are there statistics of the pesticides, the impact of the pesticides in food systems, and how the pesticides are used in the countries? And I'd ask, this was not an object of debate and the presentation of people here, but if any of the panelists would comment on the impact of the pesticides in the global health, we can have a quick round, certainly. Very briefly, Gisele, in my presentation, in the first recommendation of the guide, when we recommend that healthy food must be based on fresh or minimally processed foods, this is an observation both with regards to the variety, which is important. Jeffrey talked about that. It's not only food and vegetables. There's cereals, roots, and the human beings are omnivores. So all of these foods are important, and these foods must be produced sustainably and preferably by agroecology, because the industrial agriculture that is in the very base of the production of ingredients, of ultra-processed foods, but is in the basis of several foods that are directly consumed by people, use a great amount not only of pesticides, but fertilizers and different techniques that are not environmentally friendly. So it is fundamental to look at that. But with specific regards to pesticides, it refers to all foods, not only group 1, but group 2, group 3, group 4, all foods. When we use pesticides, according to recent research on the content of pesticides in foods, several ultra processed foods, as expected, they like glycosates, for instance, that you find the different types of biscuits, of cookies, and ultra processed foods. That's why it is very important to have the way of production, well, to prevent us from consuming this xenobiotics. As I have mentioned, when I talked about xenobiotics, we could add here the molecules, the substances, the chemical substances that are used as pesticides that are ever present in our food systems. A great question.
Thank you, Professor Carlos. We will close this part, and I'll hand it over to the Masters of Ceremony. Thank you, Dr. Gisele, by your brilliant conducting of this debate. Before we hand over to Dr. Fabio Gomes, our technical team has asked for a moment so that we might generate a new link to continue with more participants in the seminar.
Pode continuar? Então, tudo bem. Vamos continuar com o nosso evento.
Okay, let's continue. Let's hand over to Dr. Fabio Gomes. He's a representative of PAHO, and he will talk about access and consumption of ultra-processed food in Latin America and strategies to reduce consumption. Dr. Fabio, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Firstly, to thank the Ministry of Health of Brazil for the organization, for the opportunity of being able to contribute to this dialogue. Before I share my screen, I think I need you to authorize so that I can share my screen. Thank you. Just to inform that I will talk in Portuguese. Some slides will be I will speak in Portuguese, some slides are in Spanish, but I will continue in Portuguese since we do have translation. We not always have this possibility. Thank you very much. And I think the idea connects very much with the debate that the whole group is doing. Not only, every group is pretty clear about the discussions, the importance in restricting ultra-processed products and how it's important these dietary guidelines in terms of the access and consumption. So we're going to talk a little bit about how these ultra-processed have been increasing in terms of availability and what are the actions that we can and countries have advanced in order to reduce this demand and offer. In our publication of 2015, we already showed with data from the Euromonitor that in all countries in Latin America have been incrementing these ultra-processed, and this increment is substantial every year. There is no indication that it will stabilize. And in the 2019 publication, we highlighted that this growth of products and beverages that are ultra-processed is 3 or more times quicker than the growth of other foods and groups, including those that are packaged. So even products that we have here in the first column, first products that are packaged, that could be minimally processed, like fruits and some vegetables. And then we can see in the middle those of ultra-processed. We can see the difference of growth between 2000, 2014. It was 50 times greater, and a projection until 2019, 3 or more times the growth. So the ultra-processed as a group of products that leverages the worsening of nutrition in our region. And this set of ultra-processed products, and this is very important because sometimes some policies are centered in trying to reformulate these products. And in the end, we see that besides the negative elements in terms of nutrition, like was amply said here, the non-nutritional aspects are also critical. And with this speed and growth of ultra-processed in our region, we will never be able to solve. And even if the problem was just the nutritional composition, we could solve it with the reduction of certain critical nutrients. And this publication, we decided to make explicit the quantity in tons of sugar, just to highlight one of the ingredients that these ultra-processed throw in our food systems, confronting the idea that if we eliminate the quantity, if we reformulate the products, that we will have a substantial effect. That's not going to happen in our region due to the volume. So the quantity of sugar that is thrown into our systems just through this set of products. So going a little bit in the conversation of how we can reduce this expansion of these ultra-processed products in nutrition and our food systems in our countries, one of the easiest ways to identify this and to think how these guidelines can be guidelines for the population, but also to set up policies that will support the adoption of these practices and recommendations. So an easy way to see this is to think how these epidemics are produced and how the epidemic of the consumption of ultra-processed and about diseases and health conditions are generated due to this consumption, and with the expansion of ultra-processed food and how they are created. They're not here by chance. There's a strategies for these epidemics to happen, be it in the point of view of the presence of ultra-processed in the nutrition, as well as the expansion of those diseases related to those products. So if we think about it, that to produce these epidemics, we have a set of products, practices that would favor the expansion of these products, and policies thinking if we had to worsen the situation and to expand the presence of ultra-processed, what would be the corporative policies that are being used to make that happen. So in the products we already know, we've heard very well, what are the products that are the source of the expansion of these epidemics, like the obesity pandemic and those chronic diseases. Ultra-processed are clearly the set of products that has the greatest potential of expanding these epidemics. And as regards the practices, Carlos mentioned a little bit in his answer in how corporations use these commercial practices to expand those products. not only produce them, but all of the actors that are dedicated to expand these products, and so that these products be made from food to essential food. So this construction happens with the use of publicity, the positioning of products in the environments, to find these products, and they're ever present everywhere you go, and the labeling itself as a strategy of distorting of what really is the product. We have various examples in how labeling is used so that the consumer might believe that that product is food and not ultra-processed. So this set of strategies, if we don't regulate these strategies and these practices, we will have a lot of difficulty to break this expansion, because we will never have the same number of resources that these corporations have, and we won't be able to increase the consumption of non-processed products and in cooking if we don't reduce this pressure and this change to ultra-processed that these products generate. And the evidence is very clear in showing this to us. We show with this index of deregulation of the market, in how deregulated is the market, the more deregulated it is, the greater the sales of ultra-processed products. So we know that if we do not regulate the labeling, the marketing, the environments, and put taxes to reduce the economic availability of these products, we will not be able to reduce this in our food systems. And starting in terms of labeling, we have something that sums up how countries have sought to reach this main objective, that is front labeling, that are associated to those that most kill and eliminate years of life of our population. We've gone through an evolution process in Latin America and Caribbean to go from a system first in Mexico, which was obligatory, which was a miniature that didn't take into account but put data to the population. We know that is different. If that is not transformed in information, we will demand of people a greater employment, and we already know this from the 70s. They use very little time and very little effort to take their decisions. In terms of the use of portions, we've also identified as how this was manipulated by the industry to confuse these two equal products that had the same size, because this varying a portion or the presentation of the package allows that values presented to consumers were different and hard to compare. And we learn from the studies in the investigation for consumers and marketing that informations that are not comparable are abstracted by the consumer. So if he sees two products with different numbers and different portions, he abstracts it. And at this moment, England started with a semaphore system that put colors to these nutritional tables, and in this way improved the interpretation. And Ecuador, learning a little bit of what worked and not in England, tried to eliminate the numbers. The numbers complicated the understanding of consumers and used only a text semaphore that shows high, low, or medium, not talking about portion and only using 100 grams to standardize. And then we learn from the experience of Ecuador that using these multiple colors would demand from the consumer and also confuse the consumer, especially in situations in where a product had something that was high in sugar but low in sodium, or low in sugars, high in salt. So these conflicting combinations conflicted the consumer and also complicating identifying these in the packages in terms of high process, and this stopped people from taking decision. And we weren't able in Ecuador to have a result as effective as we've seen in other countries. So Chile, we innovate once more in the process of design of the labeling. Yes, we understand that the text system is better, but let's study other ways of doing this. They seek icons that could be recognized all over the world, which is the stop sign, and that this warning system is easier, more effective, and that excess is more effective in Spanish than high. We weren't able to change the system, not because of the evidence, but the regulation was already advanced, and they continue using the 100 grams because there wasn't another recommendation that could connect the criteria with the recommendations in terms of ingestion as defined by the WHO. Mexico and other countries, Costa Rica, Argentina, Colombia, follow this process of learning that the region has, of seeking regulatory excellency and seeking the experience of these countries, always to advance and not have setbacks. And it doesn't stop there. Mexico continues with the warning system, and they adopted the word excess, but we have this in Chile and Uruguay, the efficiency, and they put a caloric basis to adjust, and so that the changes that the system can bring and that this change in diet and could adapt to the recommendations of the World Health System. And other elements that are important in terms of labeling, and countries have advanced in that sense. More than bring and put in a simple way and alert people in terms of critical elements and other ingredients that we will talk further ahead, it's fundamental that countries can eliminate those persuasive elements that make the population make decisions, be it conscious or unconsciously, and other elements that children and adults take decisions that are different from those that they believe are better for them. So in this case, a study with children in terms of transference of sensation. This is a theory that came up in the 70s, and all of the studies that analyze this transference get to the same conclusion. The label can transfer sensations, capability to change the flavor of the product, and this is what the study demonstrates. So we just change so that the children can notice that it has a better flavor, even because of these elements. And these elements that will changing and persuading consumers in an unconscious way have to be eliminated. In Chile, with the restriction, in Mexico, it a step ahead. Not only eliminating characters, childish characters. And this was done in Switzerland with adults. And you only add the word. So it's a text reference to fruits. And people start to recognize that as more healthy. And this is an essential step. And these new regulations, like I've mentioned, have been seeking this improvement, like Mexico, Argentina, Costa Rica, Guatemala, El Salvador, seeking to eliminate these other elements. A second point which I'd like to talk about, not only the labeling, the importance of synergy in the measures that regulate, and so it is very important when countries take this decision to have front labeling that it make it easier regulation and the application of taxes. And like this article that was published in August, that advertise and the reduction, any kind of ad in schools is even better. That the schools that are regulated, like those defined in Chile, will reduce. We can reduce these products, and we can see that the reduction of these commercial practices are effectively able to reduce of these ultra-processed. And another issue, important lesson from this result, is that the products that do not have labeling warnings, they increase their sales and their consumption. So as important as which products have to be defined, which products should not be regulated. And in that sense, is that the countries have improved the profile in which nutrients they adopt, and those profiles set up by PAHO, in which products should be regulated and which one should be in the non-regulated, because that will increase the sales of those products, and we might not have the final result that we wanted. So we need to advance in this sense, and the countries have started doing that, starting to seek systems and to use the PAHO food profile system, because that follows the WHO guidelines. And also the concern and the profile of PAHO, it combines the classification of foods with the profile of nutrients and brings the need in terms of warning of certain ingredients like sweeteners, non-sugar sweeteners, and this is fundamental so that we can keep the number of processed foods that should be regulated and to be guaranteed. And one of the elements that we've identified, and more specifically in terms of advertisement, is how to regulate publicity better than the way it's been done, and how we're going to learn from our experiences from various countries, because like the industry of food industry, tobacco, but the industry of ultra-processed has been using cross-promotion, so to design the labels of a non-regulated product to promote the ones that is regulated. Once more, it's very important to have a profile of nutrients that have to be regulated so that we can have regulation of ads as well as those done in school environments. Otherwise, we will have more deregulated products promoting those that are regulated. And this we find for alcoholic beverages. We've seen the strategy used for ultra-processed, where products are very similar. And the difficulty when you're doing an ad of a Coca-Cola, for example, that is zero cal, but you're also promoting the other option that is which sugar.
So by not restricting the advertisement of that, we have a problem. And one of the problems that we have regarding cross, or that we've seen that, well, in the context, this meeting, just this cross promotion that we have with regards to the child, different child products and ultra processed products, it's important to remember that they will mistake or confuse the decision of the consumers and put the food and lives of people and babies at risk. Here, another example of how the ultra processed promote this confusion that we don't know if people are buying the foods or if they're buying toys. And this is an example. I liked this example because of that. What is this? Is this is it a dinosaur? It is a yogurt. So you're not selling a food nor a product anymore. So it is important for us to highlight this regulation is fundamental for this initial step of life in which the ultra processed foods they will also commit the continuation of breastfeeding and the intake both in the childhood as well as in the future of saturated fats and will compromise even in if an intergeneration effect as it affects mothers and parents and will affect the food consumption of children or children between 6 and 24 months. We're talking about a regulation that needs to be extended to this populational group for us to prevent these distortions, even in the complementary food intake, and as well as in the protection of breastfeeding. Another point that I wanted before joining with regards to advertisement regulation, we have always insisted some countries still don't have a system or a specific policy towards regulating food advertisement, but many countries have legislation to regulate advertisement or consumer deceiving. And in this meeting, this report, we highlight how many countries already have mechanisms in place that could be used to prevent many of the wrongful advertisement that we have on air because they deceive the consumers or either that or they violate or are abusive because they are directed to children. So it is very important for the countries to, at the same time, they are looking for improving their specific legislations towards the regulation of food products and auto processed foods, for them to use the existing legislation to start and sanction the type of advertisement that are expanding and being used to expand the presence of ultra processed foods. I have talked about the importance of having the definition of those products that are regulated, well, to have that well defined. Since 2016, the countries of Latin America and the Americas count on an instrument that facilitates this definition to countries and allow the changes that these effective policies will generate in the change in the purchase decision can be reflected in a change towards food intake that go together with the World Health Organization. If we don't adopt that, we'll have changes in the procurement, in the purchases that may not reflect an effective change in food and won't have the effects for the future. And I'll end with taxes. We know that historically the price of ultra processed foods, and here we have a single product, which is a sugary drink, with a relative price of and how these prices are reducing. In many of these publications in Latin America and Caribbean. But we'll have to fix this distortion that the market insert that will increasing the taxes on these products and applying that that will affect the financial access, and that means to increase. Well, at the moment that we reduce this access to ultra processed, we increase the financial access, and increase the spaces in the wallets and the stomachs to the foods that we actually need to promote. So here we have a publication, and at the end, I'll send the link to the nutrition website at the PAHO website. You can download this publication that brings elements of what are, well, the design elements of the sugary drinks. And to the right, a publication that just came out yesterday that we published the methodological note with a standard indicator that we're going to use, which is based on the indicator for tobacco that also follows how well the proportion of taxes, the proportion of the prices of products that are taxes. This is used for tobacco, and even in the case of tobacco, we have a recommendation of how much of this price should be taxes. And the idea is for us to follow this indicator for the whole region. We have calculated that for Latin America and Caribbean, and we'll follow the countries and how much the tax, how much the price is composed by taxes in the case of the sugary drinks for a region, and to try and increase that. Finally, we talked about besides the practice, the corporation also use policies to be able to reach the larger objective, which is to maintain all markets unregulated. We talked about the unregulation is necessary to keep the expansion of ultra processed. So all policies, all corporate policies, even the ones that will look for society, for nutrition, the ones that will find other players to try and change the decision of the government in towards the companies, they will be done to try and maintain this market unregulated and to maintain the expansion of the ultra processed products ever growing in our region. So we don't develop mechanisms to face those corporate strategies. If we don't face that, we'll have more and more hardships into breaking the status quo of unregulated market that we have in many countries in our region. And I'll end with this quote of the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on the right to food, which was backed up by the rapporteur to the right to health, and by the president, the chair and vice chair of the work group on human rights and multinational companies, as well as other business opportunities. The states must work to diminish the influence of these companies. Without that, it will be very hard, although we know the policies and we know which policies must advance to restrict the access and availability of ultra-processed foods, will have the hardship to advance. So besides improving our policies to contrast or to counter the influence of these companies in the decision making of our government. Here, I'll leave the link to our page, paho.org/nutricion, and with this QR code, you can reach that you can have taxes and other regulatory measures that are important for us to have the scenario in our region. Thank you very much.